Hey, and welcome to a new edition of Standard Spike. This week I'm bringing you a modern daily event with a Loam deck that I've found to be pretty cool and also pretty good. So before we get into that, well, let's go ahead and go over the whole deck. This is my own version of the deck, which is not typical, even though this deck is not seeing any play. Last season it did see a bit of play before the end, but my version is still very different from that. So let's go ahead and go over everything. The mana base first. We have 25 lands. This deck is pretty land hungry because it's doing a lot of things with the lands, so it can afford to play 25. And at the same time, it really needs to have specific colors because it has very serious color requirements. So we have mostly black-red lands up in here. We want to cast these cards on turn 1 a lot of the time with Cliffs or Blood Crypt, and then Cairns for filtering. The red-green lands are some of the worst lands in the deck, but you have to have a few. 4 might be too many. Like the Thicket is the one that might be cut, but it does allow you to cast Seismic Assault when you've drawn Forest or Overgrown Tomb. So, or not just drawn, but fetched for potentially. And then the 2 ravines are much better than the alternative manlands, Treetop Village and Lava Claw Reaches. Lava Claw is better at adding mana, but it's much worse at attacking, so Ravine definitely gets the slot there. And Treetop Village, while better at attacking, is also much worse for mana, so that does not get the slot. Then we have Stomping Ground and Overgrown Tomb, of course. 4 Catacomb, 2 Tarn. 6 fetch lands is kind of on the low side. I would love to be able to play 7, I think, but I'm not sure if we can afford to. Between the amount of damage we take and the really low amount of basics in duels, it's kind of hard to play more than 6. I could actually see myself cutting Thickets maybe for a 7th. Just depends on how I feel about it down the line. And then we have 4 basic lands, 2 swamps because that's the one we're fetching more often with Verdant Catacomb, and probably also sacrificing it to Smallpox. And then we have 1 Tectonic Edge, which is a nice card to have main deck, but I'm not sure this deck actually needs it anymore. Tron is not a big part of the metagame, and even if we play against Tron, they usually have 4 relics main deck, the red-green version, so I'm not sure this is really going to matter, but we have it anyway just because it's a holdover. But cutting that would actually improve the mana a bit. It also gives you an answer for other manlands though, so there's that. Then we're moving on to the spells. We have a lot of 1-drops. Let's see. I think this deck probably won't keep a hand without a 1-drop unless it's a pretty good Life from a Loam hand, like Life Smallpox, something like that. But yeah, these are pretty important. The Looting is one of the most important cards. You can keep almost any hand if it can cast Looting, because it'll usually find you something to do, or between your other few cards you'll have something to do. And then you can always flash it back if you still missed. Inquisition is just a great card to interact with them. It takes hate cards out of their hand as well. Better than Thoughtseize because we can't really afford the extra life. Where the Thoughtseize is actually a better card, but I don't think in this deck we can afford to play Thoughtseize. 3 Crime, 3 Jab. I was kind of thinking that might have been too many of each of these, but well, actually Jab I think is the better one right now. But I'm going with 3 of each currently because I actually kind of fell out of love with Bloodghast, and I'll get to that one in a minute. Life from Loam, well, the only thing I need to say about this is the deck revolves completely around it, and you want to dredge it almost every time it's in your graveyard, and it's just an amazing card. It's the entire reason this deck exists. Then we have Smallpox, which this is a card that not a lot of other versions of this deck were playing, and I think it's really powerful. It usually is a huge blowout, and they're not usually prepared for it either. Like they usually keep landlight hands, or a lot of decks in this format just are landlight. So, and then hitting the creature, it can kill Goyf or Delver. It's just really good, really huge swing. It tends to be, and we have a ton of lands, so we can recover from that pretty easily. 2 Terminate. This is pretty much just for Tarmogoyf because this deck has a pretty big problem with Tarmogoyf. I did have Maelstrom Pulse at one point, but because it's much more versatile, but the 3 mana was a big issue, and also killing our own glyphs at the same time as killing theirs is also really bad. So Terminate got the slot there. Abrupt Decay is going to be a lot better than Terminate for post rotation. Then we have Tarmogoyfs. I think this is another card that not a lot of other versions were playing. I wanted a win condition. Like, this deck sometimes just doesn't have win condition, and Tarmogoyf is a really good win condition in a deck like this, and it also stops pretty much everything on the ground. So just a really good card to have in this deck. The one downside is that it also gets hit by Graveyard Hate, but I really don't think there's an alternative to Goyf, so we have to play it. And then there's 2 Bloodghast where there used to be 4. The initial idea was that you want to dredge Life from Loam every turn if you can, and at some points you just don't have anything to do, even though you're dredging Life from Loam. So you have to be able to hit stuff, and Bloodghast is one of the cards you want to hit that allows you to kill them faster. But I've come to find that that situation where you're just dredging Life from Loam, have nothing to do, doesn't actually occur that often. But Bloodghast still does stuff. It still protects your Goyf from Smallpox. It's still a great card to discard to looting or Smallpox, and it's still a good card to dredge into. And it does actually deal a considerable amount of damage, so it's not the worst. But I'm considering taking this card out. For now, we're doing 2. 4 Seismic Assault. The entire game plan pretty much revolves around drawing one of these, so really no reason not to play 4. And then 1 Liliana. I'm not a huge fan of this card in the deck. You don't want to have a lot of 3-drops, and this one I kind of think is on the weak side. But I've also decided that I wanted to have Planeswalkers, at least in the sideboard. You'll see that in a second, so that we have something to fight through hate with. This one doesn't win the game by itself, but it still does have a pretty good impact over a few turns. So it still gets a slot. Now moving on to the sideboard, we have Garruk, the card I just mentioned. Just a Planeswalker that kind of helps us fight through the hate, because there's not a lot of other cards that do that. And if we just board it in another creature, it can just get Path or something. But Garruk gives them something else to fight through that they probably aren't prepared for. 3 Ancient Grudge, mostly for affinity, but obviously it's a great card to have in a deck that dredges and discards a lot. 1 Combust, just for Twin, because the matchup is slightly on the weak side, I think. Definitely is going to be Abrupt Decay post-rotation. 2 Duress and 2 Surgicals make up our kind of hate package. Duress is the least narrow card we could play, in addition to Inquisition, so that gets a slot there. And then between all the discard spells we have, I figured Surgical would be the next best thing for various combo decks or graveyard decks. Ghost Quarter, just another copy of this, but in different form. It does some things better and some things worse, but having 1 of each I think is better than having 2 of either of them. 4 Kitchen Finks, because this deck does take a lot of damage. It really needs a little bit of help in the aggro department, so Finks is pretty good there. Casting it sometimes is hard, but we'll have to make do, because that's a card we really need to have against aggro decks. So that's the deck. One more thing about the deck is it's very, very reliant on synergy, if that's not already apparent. But that's just the way the deck works. It's very synergistic. So we have just a few minutes till we start, so let's go ahead and get into it.